Well, shalom, y'all. Today we're going to be talking about Ezekiel 11. Debbie channels her inner English teacher and talks about the origin of the phrase silver lining. Now don't flash back to 6th grade grammar class. She does a very good job of it. But the point is that Ezekiel is in his judgment phase of his narrative. Judgment on Israel, judgment on the nations, and it's deserved judgment because God is raising the case against them. God is saying, here are all the things you have done. This is why you will be judged. But in the midst of all that judgment, there is a silver lining. And the silver lining is the hope for a remnant. Now that applied to them back in the time of Ezekiel, but it also applies to us. So if you stay to the end, Debbie will show us how we have a silver lining in our cloud today and how our silver lining can guarantee us that we will be part of the remnant. So stay tuned as Debbie talks about Ezekiel 11.
English teacher moment. All right. The phrase, every cloud has a silver lining. Is that true?
Yeah. I don't think so.
I think it depends on your perspective.
All right. Elaborate.
Are you pessimistic or are you optimistic?
Okay. All right. I think that can be very true. My brother would agree with you. He'd say that I'm the pessimistic one and he's the optimistic one. Charles, you said not true.
Well, I think
He's pessimistic.
you go through times when you can't see a silver.
Okay.
And if you are estranged from God at the time, there may not be a silver.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Romans 8:28 would have us believe there is.
All right.
Things working good.
And maybe it's a matter of timing in terms of when we see the silver lining.
May not see it.
Okay. I started looking at that because I wanted to know where it came from. And it turns out that John Milton, the poet John Milton, coined the phrase silver lining in a poem in 1634. And it was it was in reference to God initially. Okay, so it says, I see you visibly and now believe that he, the supreme good, to whom all things ill are but as slavish officers of vengeance, would send a glistening guardian if need were to keep my life and honor unassailed. Was I deceived, or did a sable cloud turn forth her silver lining on the night? So he's talking about God's working in his life. It was kind of interesting if you know John Milton, Paradise Lost, all that. Then it's obvious that he had as a common theme the idea of God and the presence and the workings of God. But it really became popular in English with American writer Sarah Peyton Parton. That was a little hard. And she wrote for Ladies Home Journal under the name Fanny Fern. So I had heard of Fanny Fern, but I had not heard of her actual name. She was at one point the highest paid writer in the US, which is kind of interesting. And in 1853, she wrote a piece of prose for the magazine that it was named Nil Desperandum, okay, like no despair. And she wrote the line, every cloud has a silver lining. And this was published in 1853. And I thought it was interesting. I'm just going to read it to you real quickly, because again, look at where the hope lies. Every cloud has a silver lining, and he, capital H, who wove it knows when to turn it out. So after every night, however long or dark, there shall yet come a golden morning. Your noblest powers are never developed in prosperity. Any bark may glide in smooth water with a favoring wind, but that is a brave, skillful oarsman who rows upstream against the current with adverse winds and no cheering voice to wish him Godspeed. Keep your head above the wave. Let neither sullen despair nor weak vacillation drag you under. Heed not the poisoned arrow of sneaking treachery that whizzes past you from the shore. Judas sold himself when he sold his master, and for him there dawned no resurrection morning. 'Tis glorious to battle on with a brave heart, while cowering pusillanimity turns trembling back. They really liked vocabulary in the 19th century. Dream not of the word surrender. When one frail human reed after another breaks or bends beneath you, lean on the rock of ages. The great architect passes you through the furnace, but to purify. The fire may scorch, but it shall never consume you. He will yet label you fine gold. The narrow path may be thorny to your tender feet, but the promised land lies beyond. The clusters of hope may be seen with the eye of faith. Your hand shall yet grasp them. Your eyes revel from the mountaintop over the green pastures and still waters of peace. You shall yet unbuckle your dusty armor while soft breezes fan your victor temples. Nil desperandum. So do not despair. We've been facing some bad times. I think we can all agree that the past 2 years have not been what we would say as the best years in our American history, or even personally necessarily. But I think there are some bright spots if we look at those 2 years. It's hard to see the silver linings. Are there any silver linings that you can think of where God has worked in the past 2 years in a way that maybe you hadn't expected, or in a way where you kind of had to look beyond the dark clouds and the idea that you were quarantined, et cetera, maybe even illness?
Well, I'll tell you what came to my mind. I have to probe exactly the silver lining to me is when somebody friends and people chat, taking me shopping, and brought me food, us.
Okay. All right. So those connections, all right, see, they're brought to a surface. Maybe you hadn't noticed them before. All right. Or maybe it's a situation where they're just manifesting friendship in a different way. Okay. I think that's a great one.
I think it's forcing families to spend more time together. Now, I don't know whether that's good or bad. In some
Okay.
cases, it's probably good. In some cases, probably bad.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that I thought about, because I've said before, it has been, I can't even think of the last time. I guess when he lived here was the last time that we had this much time with Dan. And even when he lived here, we didn't have this much time with Dan. I mean, because, everybody's doing their own thing. So that's been a silver lining, because he's really funny. All right. And he's kind of a hoot to have around. So there's silver linings that we can see even in the midst of these dark spots. But a lot of times it's hard when you're in the middle of the pressures and the middle of the doom and gloom, which it's a valid thing to say, these are bad things that are happening. It's not trying to negate that there are bad things happening. But sometimes it's hard to see. And there are other times where you don't want to hear somebody when they're telling you to look at the bright spot, because there's really, I don't know, Charles, when Linda says to you, well, you're just a pessimist, you need to look at it like this. How does that?
that all the time. Drives me crazy.
Thank you. Yes, Dan does that to me all the time too. That is one thing I will not miss when he goes. But I need it. But I need that kind of thing. I need a reminder. And sometimes, Linda, I would imagine that when you're delivering that idea that there's still a silver lining, and he rebuffs your efforts to boost, how does that make you feel? Okay. You know, I would imagine, yeah, I'm just not gonna say anything anymore. Yep, that's okay. I'm not, but that's me reacting. So with Ezekiel, we know that the book of Ezekiel, this is taking a long time to get in, and I'm sorry, but the book of Ezekiel definitely delivers some bad news. Okay. And we're going to be in chapter 11 today, and it kind of starts off with some bad news. But there's a silver lining that's thrown in there. And we know ultimately we get to the silver lining in the book of Ezekiel, but that's a little farther down the road where it becomes more obvious instead of just a hint of silver that you see at the edge of the dark clouds. But we're going to look for it where it appears in this chapter. Okay, so we know that Ezekiel, he has some wacky visions, and I am so glad that I didn't have to teach last Sunday because, you know, the whole seraphim and, you know, the four faces, and I know, you know, I read up on the symbolism, but then you've got the wheels within the wheels, and people are saying, oh, that's really like a UFO. And it's like, oh, you know, it's just a little too bizarre for me to read.
Maybe it's true.
Yeah.
It's not something.
Yeah.
That's what everyone's on.
It could be. It could be. And it's so hard for me to wrap my head around it. And I was very thankful. There was a silver lining that I was teaching last Sunday. And then I got to this one, and it still mentions the wheels and the seraphim. So I might skip over that just a little bit. We're not going to get into anything with that really, but he has all these visions, and the spirit, and that's the word that Ezekiel used. The spirit moves him from one place to the other as a part of these chapters. And he's given these prophecies and these messages to deliver. And in chapters 4 and 5, which we have skipped over, but that's some bad news. Okay, there's a big old dark cloud. The Lord's going to destroy Jerusalem. Okay, so not exactly the bearer of glad tidings when he has that message. And then in 6 and 7, there's a little more. Okay, enemies are going to come, and they're going to destroy the land of Judah. All right, again, not good news. And then in chapter 8, he starts, he's been instructed to call out the Israelites and their false gods. So, you know, more than just a little hand slapping that's going on there. Again, not good news. 9 and 10, judgment on Jerusalem. Here we go again. Evidently, they haven't learned their lesson. But chapter 11, we start seeing a silver lining. And that's Jerusalem's hope in the future. But there's still the dark cloud because God's glory is leaving Jerusalem. He's departing. Now we know that we talk about heaven and the idea that heaven is really being in the presence of God. So what would hell be? The absence of God. So if God's glory is leaving Jerusalem, then what are things going to be like? Hell. Okay. I mean, that's it. So, but we've still got that little silver lining that we're going to see as we work through chapter 11. All right. So let me look at verses 1 through 4 first. And Ezekiel is transported, all right, to Jerusalem in a vision. Then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me to the gate of the house of the Lord that faces east. And if you've been, then they believe that that's the Kidron Valley, the one that faces the Kidron Valley. There at the entrance of the gate were 25 men, and I saw among them Jazaniah, son of Azur, and Pelatiah, son of Benaniah, leaders of the people. The Lord said to me, Son of man, These are the men who are plotting evil and giving wicked advice in this city. They say, haven't our houses been recently rebuilt? This city is a pot, and we are the meat in it. Therefore, prophesy against them. Prophesy, son of man. All right, so one thing that jumps out in verses 2 and 4 is how Ezekiel is addressed. What is he called? Son of man. Over 90 times in the book, that phrase is used. Son of man. Why does that really jump out at us?
So that's what Jesus.
There's a subtle difference. It's not capitalized, which that certainly signifies something in text, but there's a definite article that's missing. Here's the English lesson. Definite article, the. The Son of Man is always used in addressing and talking about Jesus. The Son of Man. What does the indicate? Only one. All right. The idea that this is separate and distinct. It is distinctive. So when we have Son of Man without the article the, then what is he just saying? Hey, human being. Hey, guy. All right. It's, yeah, in today's vernacular, the kids would say, dude. I mean, that's really, but that's what it is. It's the idea that you are just, you're one of many. Okay. So don't do what some people do, and that they use that as a means to kind of invalidate the deity of Jesus. It's not. Okay. It's distinctive. Okay. So then we see that he sees in this vision, verse 1, there are 25 guys, 25 men. And if you go back and you read the chapters between what we heard about last week with Joel and today, in chapter 8, there's another vision that has 25 men. Most people believe these are not the same, because those 25 men in chapter 8 were worshiping the sun, the S-U-N, not the S-O-N. So the idea is that those were religious leaders. Now, in this case, these are more likely talking about city leaders, all right, the political. Now, we know that in Jerusalem, well, in lots of places, that the religious and the political can overlap. But in this particular case, they think they're talking about these guys were the movers and the shakers in terms of city planning and development. All right. The rule of the city. Think of them like county council. All right. Or city council. So we've got these 25 men, and they were the leadership of the remnant who had been left in Jerusalem. So what kind of guys were they? Look at 3 and 2. What kind of guys are they? Yeah. All right. They're plotting evil, giving wicked advice. Y'all, they are devious. They are misleading. They're evil. They're arrogant. These are not godly men. And yet they're the ones that are influencing God's city. Now, I thought it was interesting in verse 3, when you have the quote for what they say. They're trying to get people to feel safe in Jerusalem, for one thing. And then we're going to find out that they're creating another false narrative in verses 5 and beyond. They're trying to make them feel safe. And they use an analogy. Haven't our houses been recently rebuilt. In other words, we've been able to build back after Babylon has come in and destroyed everything. But look at the analogy. The city is a pot, and we are the meat in it. Now, some of you may remember, that doesn't sound real interesting to begin with, but some of you may remember, there's this lovely thing that I think all of our moms had. Some of you may still have it in your kitchen. Corningware. Got Corningware? Okay. What's one of the great things about Corningware? It pops into the fridge and you can store your food in it. Okay. And it preserves it, right? And then you can move it. Ah, my gosh, there are two perspectives on what that does, doesn't it? Okay. So in one sense, there are some people who maybe are not excellent cooks, who might just say, oh, well, that's a storage container. Okay. And so that's a way for me to store the food. All right. I get my leftovers, I put them in the Corningware, and I put it in the fridge, and then I take it out and I transfer it. Well, that's minimizing my view of Corningware and the function of Corningware. All right. We've got an answer to what's really the function, another function of Corningware, or another function of this pot that's coming up in verse 5 and going on to verse 13. Okay, so I'm going to read that real quickly and listen for how God's message about the pot totally flips what these men have been delivering to the people. Then the Spirit of the Lord came on me, and he told me to say, this is what the Lord says. This is what you are saying, you leaders in Israel, but I know what is going through your mind. You have killed many people in this city and filled its streets with the dead. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. The bodies you have thrown there are the meat, and this city is the pot. Dead. In other words, you're cooked. Your goose is cooked. But I will drive you out of it. Are they protected in the pot? No, the heat's going to get turned up on the pot. Just like that Corningware can be taken and put in the oven, and God's going to do it. I will drive you out of the city and deliver you into the hands of foreigners and inflict punishment on you. You will fall by the sword, and I will execute judgment on you at the borders of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord. This city will not be a pot for you, nor will you be the meat in it. I will execute judgment on you at the borders of Israel. And you will know that I am the Lord, for you have not followed my decrees or kept my laws, but have conformed to the standards of the nations around you. And just to kind of prove that what he's saying is true, watch this. Now, as I was prophesying, Pelatiah, son of Benaiah, died. One of the big 25. Then I fell face down and cried out in a loud voice. Alas, sovereign Lord, will you completely destroy the remnant of Israel? Okay. These men were kind of bragging that they were the superiors, that the people in exile, the people who had been taken out, were the ones that were being punished and deserved the punishment. And that the remnant, the ones who were left, were the righteous ones, the ones who had done right by God's laws. And the fact that they were able to build their homes, I hate to say it's almost like prosperity gospel. If things are going good for me, then I must be right. I must be good with God. But what is God's word saying directly to them? No, 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 you have misjudged. And we see how we can turn things and kind of take something that God isn't using as a message to us and misread it and misapply it. All right. So Ezekiel has has to go tell the leaders that contrary to their bragging, they are not superior to the exiles and they are not safe in Jerusalem, that they are going to be driven out. But here comes the silver lining, verses 14 and 16, 14 through 16. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, the people of Jerusalem have said of your fellow exiles and all the other Israelites, they are far away from the Lord. This land was given to us as our possession. Therefore say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Although I sent them far away among the nations and scattered them among the countries, yet for a little while I have been a sanctuary for them in the countries where they have gone. Okay. In 15, that's where he's quoting those leaders, those that remain in Jerusalem, the remnant. And they are basically saying, we're the chosen. But verse 16 is the response. The remnant is there, but they're going to get what's coming to them. That the ones who have been scattered have been scattered as punishment. But where's God? In the midst of them. Okay. And it's a promise that it's going to be for a short while. Now, we know that God's timetable and our timetable, not exactly the same thing. Sometimes not even close. But he says that he has been a sanctuary for them. And notice it says, for a little while, I have been a sanctuary from them. Now, when we think that, we think in terms of temporary, like he was there and he was gone. But really it's talking about the time. He's talking about for the little while that they're going to be in exile. So we don't need to misread and think, okay, he abandons them while they're in the middle.
You know, it's amazing. I'm doing the Bible. And I was reading through Leviticus. Anyway, Leviticus tells the Hebrew people exactly what the Lord will do if they do not follow him. This should never have been a surprise to them.
And why do you think, okay, for those out in computer land, Eva has said that Leviticus tells the Hebrew people exactly what is going to happen if they don't obey. And this should not have been a surprise to them.
Except for whenever we're looking at America, we go, oh, why is the Lord protecting them?
I mean, we do, yes, we absolutely do the same thing as a nation, as individuals.
I mean, it was just, you will eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters if you do not obey me. I mean, he tells them that in Ezekiel, in Leviticus. He tells them exactly, I will lay waste your cities as well and will make your sanctuaries desolate.
And making the sanctuaries desolate, what happens when they come back for the remnant? What happens to the temple? It's gone.
It's gone, and they never, ever stop worshiping the Lord after that. When they come back from Babylon, they never worship idols.
Okay, that was one thing that I put, that they were changed radically in exile.
He even said in Leviticus, if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their forefathers and their unfaithfulness, which they committed against me, if they uncircumcised heart becomes humble so that they make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant. That's all the way back in Leviticus.
Okay, and God is talking about who changing and repenting? His people.
His people.
His people. And And guys, I think so many times we don't get our own house right first. Whether that's literally our home family, our church family, in terms of a local church, or our bigger American church family first.
One of the things you saw-
No, go.
You asked about what's happened in the last 2 years.
Yeah,
The Lord is urging his church. That is the thing that I see more than anything in the world, is that those people that were superficial are no longer here. Some of them are, but there's a lot of people that have fallen by the wayside because it's just too much. It's just too much trouble to continue to go to church, to continue to mingle with people. It's just too much trouble.
well, I'm gonna say we need to be careful there. Okay, here's why. Because there are some people that have health issues where they have been,
But I'm saying there are ways
Yeah.
of doing that, but I'm just saying, he, but he has used this.
I think that the whole idea of the, if you want to call it a purging, the separating, I don't know, of chaff and wheat, I don't know. I think it started before COVID. Okay, Rosemary, I'm seeing your mouth moving and your brain is obviously working.
Part of me agrees with what you said. He's saying that after this, okay, go back to what I said in his sermon when he did at the Baptist convention.
Uh-huh.
And he basically indicated that he's not that. His premise was that we have as a country, and as a world, but I mean, as a country, that all of this stuff is happening to us, even to the, the tornadoes that rip through the
Right.
country over the weekend have not happened, but all of this stuff that's happening to us is because we as a people have basically turned away from God. Even the remnant is not as faithful as we should be.
Okay.
Okay, and that we are as a, whether you want to call it, he said it's not about black, it's not about white, it's not about, whether you're doing the right thing, the wrong thing, but for the most part, we have preachers and teachers that are allowing all kinds of things that are prohibited directly.
Yes.
And directly indicated as sin in the Bible.
That's what I meant with it saying it started
And
before.
they're not dead, but it started a long time ago. It's not-
Yeah.
It's not something, I mean, with my mom who was 98, I have never seen anything. And it's to the point where you do not believe anything that you hear or see or read anywhere. The only thing I have to go back to is the word of God.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying is I agree with you, but I agree with her, and I'm saying it's not there yet.
Yeah.
We got a lot more coming to us.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and we think, and we think this is trouble. Y'all, I mean, I'm not trying to diminish, but this is not persecution and trouble. I mean, we're sitting here on a Sunday morning worshiping as we wish. I'm not saying that couldn't change, but I'm saying when we talk about persecution, we don't know what that really means. I don't think most of us have experienced it. Let me put it that way.
The Lord is degrees. I think we saw in the Bible degrees of things going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's an exciting time to be alive.
Well,
Someone's.
I think, let's put it this way. I am so ready for Jesus to come back, and his hand is on the doorknob. I wish he'd open the door, but it's on his timetable. But I think it's clear that the hand is on the knob. But again, time, how long is it going to take right? Or another 2,000. I don't know. But I don't think so. Okay, I'm way off on a tangent. I'm apologizing, but I think about how much things have sped up in the past, even the past 25 to 30 years. If you look at how things changed for my grandfather, for example, he had been born in 1916, and how things changed for him versus how it had changed for his father. The changes that we have seen in terms of what we can do in terms of communication, science, travel, entertainment, and what we can do in terms of ministry. That has changed exponentially. Just the fact that we're sitting here having Sunday school with people who are at the beach or who need to isolate, the fact that we can do that 10 years ago, I never would have thought. That was 10 years. So, I think that things are changing more quickly now. A quickening. It's kind of like in labor, there's a quickening, and it gets faster and faster and faster and faster the closer you get to the point where the baby's delivered. Things start changing more rapidly. And I kind of think that's where we are. But God hadn't given me any word other than, this is my Bible. Okay, this is not my iPad. All right, this is my Bible. So I have to rely on that in order to have discernment about the things that are happening. Okay, all right, so let's go to 17 through 21. Here's more silver lining. Therefore say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will gather you from the nations and bring you back from the countries where you've been scattered, and I will give you back the land of Israel again. They will return to it and remove all its vile images and detestable idols. I will give them an undivided heart and put a new spirit in them. I will remove from them their heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh. Then they will follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. They will be my people and I will be their God. But as for those whose hearts are devoted to their vile images and detestable idols, I will bring down on their heads what they have done, declares the sovereign Lord. Okay, so what's the promise in 17? I'm bringing them back. And we know 1948 is a magic number in terms of that promise, because the nation of Israel was founded or refounded, and they started coming back. And the idea that they will return to it and remove its vile images, and I will give them an undivided heart. Now, I can't speak for every one of them, but I don't think any nation has an identity quite like Israel. And is that part of what we're seeing in terms of the fulfillment of this prophecy? I think it could be. They no longer had a problem with idols. They grew closer and more reliant on God. Now, the law kind of became an idol to them. But it's not a blanket promise, which verse 21 says. Because there were going to be some who were devoted to the vile images and the idols. Each one had to be in relationship. And we see that in terms of Messiah, right? 22 and 23. Then the cherubim with the wheels beside them spread their wings, and the glory of the God of Israel was above them. The glory of the Lord went up from within the city and stopped above the mountain east of it. So God's spirit departed, and we know that ultimately Jerusalem was destroyed. Now, did the spirit return? I'd say we're about to celebrate it. All right, they changed radically in exile, like we were talking about. And then Jesus came. Y'all, interesting where the spirit stopped. The mountain east of Jerusalem. Do you know what that is? It's the Mount of Olives. Jesus ascended there. And that's where prophecy says he's coming back. And that's our silver lining. In the midst of all of this, when we feel like God is absent, God is always working in the background. Always, 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 always. We just don't always get to know the details of the work. He's given us the plan. We've got the blueprint. Scripture gives us that. Some of us get focused on having to know every single little thing. I'm bad about that. Yes, it is. It is the control freak. But I know he's already told me it's going to be okay. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be hard getting to okay. But the promise is that it's going to be okay. And God is a promise keeper.
Or this apparatus, the lady that was trapped under the wall and the factory in Kentucky.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, I got them.
Oh, wow. Okay. See, I didn't see that. I just knew that I had seen that she had been trapped under the wall at the candle factory, right? Okay. But I didn't see the whole thing with her. I just saw a little blurb. Well, in the midst of this Christmas season, I think we need to kind of make sure that we're focusing. Christmas is great, but that's just the hint of what's to come. Easter is what it was all about. And ultimately, the second return is a lot more than a silver lining. And we need to kind of focus on that instead of on the clouds and the storms. So that's what I got from Ezekiel 11. Who's up next? I don't know. John, you're up. There you go. So we're going to close with prayer. Bubba, do you mind praying?